those of you who may be new to us, Community Science is a consulting firm focused on building communities, capacity, and partnering with them to create real lasting change. We bring an equity-centered approach to evaluating and doing the work and everything that we do. Whether it is community development, organizational transformation, or large scale systems change work, our passion lies in leveraging data, research, and collaboration to help communities and funders reach their full potential. And the work with One Schenectady is a great example of that work that we'll share with you today. We're partnering with the Schenectady Foundation and the community to co-create solutions that are truly resident-driven and equity-focused. All right, so a little bit about myself. I am a managing associate at Community Science. I come to you with over a decade of experience in community organizing and systems change work. As the project director for the Schenectady Foundation initiative, I work closely with other funders and communities to drive sustainable systems change work. My focus specifically lies around power building and organizational development, and I specialize in helping groups to take those critical first steps because you just have to take the first step toward lasting change. Today, we'll be taking a closer look at One Schenectady and where we are today, an initiative led by the Schenectady Foundation with the support from Community Science. And we'll explore what it takes to mobilize and sustain resident-led change in general. So enough about me. I am thrilled to introduce to you our two panelists for the day who bring both experience and insights to this conversation. First, we have Robert Carrera, Executive Director of the Schenectady Foundation. He has over 30 years in the social sector. Robert serves as a chief catalyst for community-driven change. His strategic leadership has been essential in shaping One Schenectady's vision and direction. And before joining the Schenectady Foundation, Robert also led the United Way of Schenectady County as CEO. And next, we're joined by Dr. David Chavez, a senior fellow with Community Science. David is internationally recognized for his experience in building community capacity, driving systems change. His work focuses on designing and evaluating strategies that build community power and tackle structural inequities. David's experience across national and local initiatives, including One Schenectady, will add incredible depth to this conversation. So these are your panelists, and we're happy to be with you all today. So a little bit about our time today. So first, we'll start off with discussing exactly what community-driven system change is and what it looks like in practice. And next, we'll dive into the Schenectady experience itself, how One Schenectady emerged to address systemic challenges and what impacts it had on the community. Then we'll explore the strategy, the ecosystem approach that we took inside of this work, focusing on how building a power building ecosystem can sustain long-term change and help scale community efforts. We'll also take a look at the 90-day quick win strategy that we use to get buy-in. A focused short-term action created rapid and tangible results in Schenectady and demonstrated what's possible when community power takes center stage. Next, but most important, also we'll discuss the role of the funders. What does it mean for funders that want to be engaged in this type of work? Specifically, how can they align their resources, encourage collaboration, and provide critical infrastructure needed to support resident-driven change? And then finally, we'll wrap up with some key lessons we've learned on this journey so far. Again, we are in the thick of it. All of this is still in process, right? So you're basically getting a presentation of where we are now and also where we're headed when we are in our quest to in community-driven supporting community-driven system change work. So, and now before we jump into content and share more with you about the experience and what community-driven system change is and the strategy that we applied, we want to bring to life these efforts. So we do have a short video from a resident leader in Schenectady. You will hear from them directly about their experience in One Schenectady. So we'll pause for a moment as our tech gets our video going. We don't have audio, Noah.
One sec, we'll fix that. Make sure it's sharing from my screen.
All good. Folks, we're live. We're all in the technology world. Thank you for your grace.
Yes, just another Zoom moment.
Mhm.
Doesn't matter how many times you practice it.
Okay, we're live now.
Okay. All right, Toby.
Hey, do we have audio, Noah?
Yeah, I'm having an issue getting that sorted.
Okay. So, okay, maybe we'll come back to that. We can come back to that in the interest of time, and we'll hear from Will later. So, as Noah figures out our audio here, we can move forward, Noah, to just discuss what community-driven systems change is. So, on the screen, you see a definition of community-driven systems change. And ultimately, it occurs when members of a historically disadvantaged community leads and take collective action to achieve equitable system change. And what sets this approach apart from other systems change approaches is that it's truly driven by the community, especially by those who felt impacted by the inequities the most, right? So those that are most impacted. So rather than a top-down, very prescriptive one-size-fit-all solution, this approach empowers residents to take lead in shaping the changes based off their lived experiences and needs. And when communities are at the center of the work, the solutions not only fit better, but they last because they were built from the inside out. I like to say I want to do things with you, not to you. And that is the essence of this strategy, right? So as we go and we visit the One Schenectady's journey, keep in mind that this isn't just about hitting targets, right? It's about creating the ecosystem that, again, empowers residents to keep driving the change they want to see for the long haul. So why do we want to do why would we embark on such an effort? Well, ultimately, when communities lead the way, we start to see some really powerful shifts, right? So first, the system begins to respond more quickly, more quickly than normal, because we know that we can only move at the pace, right? And appropriately to the needs of the community in which it's serving. So it's no longer a top-down approach to change, and you actually see some change happening in real time, which we will discuss later today. We also will see a boost in civic engagement. People get more involved, whether it's voting, whether it's volunteering, or just engaging in day-to-day community life. When folks feel their voices are making a difference, they're more likely to show up and continue to engage. It also brings together people working side by side, builds understanding and trust between the different groups, strengthening the social fabric of the community. And by centering the voices of residents in general at any time, respecting their lived experience, hearing them and actually taking action, we're creating the conditions for meaningful, lasting impact that truly reflects what the community needs and wants in those spaces. However, I know that sounds great. And of course, an effort such as this, while rewarding, it is not without its challenges, right? And we're not here to tell you that it is without challenges. So resident-driven system change is extremely powerful, but there are some real obstacles in doing the work effectively. So I want to walk through a couple of them with you all. First, there are capacity gaps. So often residents don't necessarily start off with the same skills or experiences they need to drive long-scale change, right? Many need support to build or unlock their capacity in areas like advocacy or navigating complex systems or managing initiatives. And so this requires a real investment in training and development so resident leaders not only feel, but are equipped to lead this work. The next is alignment and collaboration that also couples pretty well with the history and power differences sometimes. So bringing together diverse voices and interests are essential, right? When we want to talk about, taking collective action, but it's not always easy. It's not always easy. So facilitation is really important inside of this process and ensuring that folks are leaning into the we space instead of the me space, right? So in communities where there's a history of division, mistrust, and aligning everyone under a shared vision can be a real challenge. But building trust and collaboration across different groups takes time and careful effort. Next, we have history and the power differences. So existing power structures don't always welcome resident-led change, especially when it shifts in the decision-making authority. So those in power feel threatened, leading to resistance or even efforts to undermine the work. And navigating these power dynamics are delicate, right? People look at power like they look at a slice of pie. There are only so many slices, right? So though this is a very delicate process, it is necessary inside of this work. Next huge thing is sustaining engagement. Keeping residents engaged over a long haul isn't simple, right? People's time, their energy is stretched thin. And if progress feels slow for folks, there's a risk of disillusionment, right? And you want to keep momentum going. You have to give folks something to continue to move forward, right? And giving them hope and saying that, hey, we can make this happen. And that's one thing that the short win, that 90-day process really did teach us, and maintaining that momentum and keeping that buy-in from our resident leaders. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the biggest hurdles is resources. Resident-driven efforts often have limited resources to funding, technical expertise, and people power needed to sustain the initiative long-term, the effort long-term. And while you have resident leaders involved, you also want to be able to compensate them for their expertise, meaning their lived experiences when they're leaning into that. So what does that look like? So finding ways to secure resources for the long haul is also critical to ensure that these types of initiatives not only survive that period of time, but thrive and is sustainable moving forward. And then lastly, we have the institutional resistance or backlash. So let's be honest, y'all. I'm from the South. You'll hear a lot of y'alls. So we're at the kitchen table right now. So let's be honest, y'all. Established institutions push back against resident-led initiatives often, right? So especially if the change that you're proposing does challenge the status quo. This can make it really hard, right, and difficult to push through certain things, like push things forward, even if the community, the residents, those that are most impacted are behind them. That is a challenge that is going to be there regardless. And again, I want to pause there and say that resistance is a natural response to change. It doesn't make folks a bad person. You just have to bring them along for the journey with you, right? And so it's not that it's bad. It's actually understanding how to navigate that resistance that comes to be. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted, as your question, I just want to fill in one point, emphasize one thing that you said is that that Schenectady and other places where we've worked, it's not just communities of color involved. That history piece, it's because it's issue focused. It brings together a wider net. And with that comes a lot of issues of how to work together, and establishing that positive history together is one of the key components of dealing with those historical divisions that have happened. So while the focus is on those who are historically disadvantaged, a lot of people at different times of all backgrounds feel um, uh, disenfranchised by the larger system, and this has provided opportunity to work across race and across economic class.
And gender, right?
gender,
Because we
thank
do
you.
know there's intersectionality in all of these things.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you. All right. So let's talk about it a little bit. You're sitting like, hey, I'm hearing what David's saying, I'm hearing what Jasmine's saying. What's the ecosystem? What is this all? What is the foundation that all these things are built on? And so our strategy, this ecosystem we applied has 4 pillars. Right. And the 4 pillars are media support. So strengthening the culture of transformative engagement and action by changing the narrative in the public and in social media, right? So we're calling that our media support pillar. Like, how is community engagement viewed in the media? Like, is it encouraged? What does that look like, right? And how does media support those things? The next is building community capacity. You heard me earlier saying, hey, one of the challenges of this work is capacity. Not that you don't necessarily have the capacity, we just want to unlock that capacity, right? So building capacity leans into building a coordinated system, right, in the ecosystem to build capacity for transformative community engagement, power building. So we, in this case, we're calling it our capacity building hub. The third pillar is the funding collaboration. So fostering collaboration among funders to support community-driven systems change work. How can funders come together and support other resident-led initiatives, from things that are coming up from the community to say, hey, we're gonna put some funding around behind this because you know what your community needs best, right? And then lastly, the collective power building pillar, bringing together grassroots leaders and other leaders of community-led organizations to develop and take action on a common agenda through a neighborhood assembly model, which we will unpack in the next slide. Okay, so now we know the pillars. There are 5 entities, you can call it, or components that support the pillars I just shared. And they are the strategy and the oversight council, illustrated here as the Community Change Council. You have the funders table. You have the power building hub or the capacity building hub. You have the neighborhood assembly, and then you have the community-driven initiative. Each one of these components or entity have a very specific role inside of the ecosystem, right? And inside of this, the environment you're building for this work to be successful. So the Community Change Council, right? The strategy and oversight component here in your top left corner is its function is to provide supervision and oversight to the neighborhood assembly, the power building hub, and the funders table to ensure that things are equitable, that we're leaning into the vision as established, right? That this is a resident-led effort, a community-driven effort, right? The next one is the funders table. The funders table acts as a dedicated space for funders to work with their peers, to monitor resource needs based off what they're hearing from the council, from the neighborhood assembly, what's swelling up from the ground, right? And expanding the pool of available and existing new resources, aggregating those resources and channeling those resources back to the community to actually drive those efforts. The next is the Power Building Hub. So the Power Building Hub supports strengthening the capacity and collaboration across neighborhoods, across community groups, issue groups, grassroots groups, all the groups necessary that are all working in their own spaces doing the work as stakeholders. So this Power Building Hub will also facilitate some peer learning among these groups to enhance their capacity and build their skills in order to drive these community-driven efforts. And then next, toward the center of your screen, you have the Neighborhood Assembly. And this is a space where there is a platform for community-led groups, resident leaders to set their common agenda. Now, I know you may be asking, hey, is there only one common agenda at a time? Absolutely not. In the perfect world of Jasmine, there'll be many things going at one time. There could be multiple collective agendas, because what we know is, again, a part of keeping buy-in from community leaders is that if the Neighborhood Assembly identifies housing as an issue area, and we are going to combine and take collective action around that, there may be another group that says, hey, we really want to work on this issue of education. That can definitely happen. So assembly members are resident leaders, right? And representatives of these community-led groups, right? And depending on those collective actions, that collective agenda, the Neighborhood Assembly will birth what is illustrated toward the bottom of the screen as your community-driven initiatives. So what is the system? What is that collective agenda? What system is it addressing? You'll hear later today more about housing as the system, and is it there? So is that the community? That would be the community-driven initiative. There is around housing. There could also be multiple around safety, around health, all those different things. So that's a little bit about what you will hear about. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, again, I've said this multiple times, wait a minute, Jasmine, David, Robert, are all these components in place? No, they're not. No, they're not. And that's what we're here to talk to you about today, because if we waited until we could put everything together, we would never take that first step. That first step will never happen. You have to take the first step, right? So in the first implementation of this phase, we bit off a piece of the overall strategy to take that first step. So we started with the Community Change Council, is why it has a checkbox next to it. The Neighborhood Assembly also has a checkbox, and the Community-Driven Initiative has a checkbox. And so we wanted to, say, hey, this can work. We wanted proof of concept. We want to say, hey, people will come together. They have no problem coming together if under a set of circumstances in the proper environment with the proper supports, that they can come together and take collective action under a common agenda. But I want to pause for a minute here because we haven't heard from Robert yet. And I'm pretty sure, in full disclosure, we see everyone who's registered. So I'm pretty sure you're wondering, hey, how did the Schenectady Foundation even get to this point? And I want to offer, Robert, if you want to share a little bit about how you all got here.
Yes, thanks so much, Jasmine. So I'm going to first set the scene a little bit so you know what Schenectady is like and what our foundation is, and then go into how do we get here. And so I'll give you a little backdrop on the journey to getting into a formal systems change model. So Schenectady, New York is a city of 65,000 people. Roughly 50% of the population are people of color. The city versus the county, which is a bit larger, is where you see most of the difficult issues coming up in terms of education, poverty, the need for affordable and better housing, all those things that are often typical of inner cities. And so the city is where we focus first. The Schenectady Foundation, we are I'd say modest-sized community foundation, and we are specifically focused on bettering the welfare of people in Schenectady County, New York. And so we can really focus on this population, very strongly. How did we get here? So I realized looking back that we were actually doing systems change work. We just didn't know that it was called systems change. So I'd say at least 10 years before we got here, we were doing things to raise the voice of people and their energy or in the community who wanted to get things done. There were several programs, projects we did, but I'll just pick one, which I think is really stands out as similar to this. So back in 2017, we launched what we call the Thriving Neighborhoods Challenge. And basically we said to the residents of the community, not to the nonprofits, but to the residents, what's your idea, right? What's your idea for making your neighborhood, your street, parts of your community a better place for you to live, right? And we had about 40 responses. Some of them were handwritten on a piece of paper. It was not a formal grant application. They could be handwritten. So it was completely accessible to anybody who wanted to submit their idea. Since that first round, we have to date supported 25 resident-driven projects and invested about $750,000 into what residents wanted to see. And we got a lot of support actually from the city of Schenectady, who became a funding partner with us on a number of these projects. So then each of those resident groups, well, how do they build capacity? We established, or we paired them up with established nonprofit organizations who became their fiscal sponsor. And so the job of the fiscal sponsor was to assist them in planning, to do the purchasing, and help them to kind of navigate through implementing their project. And this was a huge hit in the city. And then 2020 happened. I think maybe some of us remember 2020 a little bit. But we had an extraordinary community response and recovery through that first year, 2020. But coming through it, as we headed into 2021, many people, colleagues, residents who we met with saw this as an opportunity that we don't have to go back to what we were doing pre-COVID, because regulations had been relaxed, although now they put them back on, which I'd like to change. But there was a sense, this was urgency of how do we continue working together collaboratively, and how do we start affecting the systems that residents have to work with, have to deal with every day. And that eventually led us to a relationship with community science. We started, I think the first engagement was about 20 months. We involved about, 25 folks in kind of a work group. There was a community survey that was done. There was a lot of data collected to inform us, what was the community looking at like, and was it ready to do this kind of work? And out of that came the pillars that Jasmine just demonstrated to you. So the strategy of pushing out a quick win program was started in early March of this year, with a challenge of having the council, the Community Change Council, identify an issue and then work to effect change on that issue during 90 days of action and an additional roughly 30 days of engagement to understand the process they've been through and provide feedback to us. So at this point, I'll ask Jasmine, would you take us through what that 90-day process looked like?
Yeah. Thanks, Robert, for sharing how we got here. There was a lot of pre-work to get here, so thank you for that. So over the 90 days, there was a kickoff meeting with that inaugural Community Change Council, right? To orient them to the process and what we wanted to do, right? Like this, hey, what does engagement look like? What do we need from you? And also getting their buy-in and agreement to say, okay, I'm with you. Also in that kickoff, a very important thing was for people to get to know each other. So a lot of these folks that came together, they knew of each other, right? They're all working, they're working on different things. They are resident leaders, organizational leaders. And I mean from the neighborhood association leader to leaders of well-known grassroots nonprofits inside of Schenectady. It ran the gamut, right? Even including like everyday residents that had a leadership experience and wanted to join the process. And so we did have a 3-day kickoff meeting. We did have norms. We had ways of different ways of engagement, or what I like to call rules of engagement. And then previously in Robert's timeline, he talked about, hey, getting an idea of what types of things do we want to see, right? What change can happen? A part of our role at Community Science, and David is has experience in community organizing, and so do I. It was about like, hey, what's realistic to get done in 90 days? What can we really truly do in 90 days? So reviewing the desires of the community and then presenting it back to them and saying, hey, this is what could be possible in 90 days. How does this look, right? Based off what you shared, based off what you said, these are the things we think we could get done in a 90-day process. And so inside that 3 days, there was an issue identified, right? There was an action taken there. And initially it was around policy change, folks want policy change, right? But you can only do things at the speed of the system, how fast the system can go. And so if meetings aren't happening to ensure that can happen, then maybe that's not the best thing to go with. So the Community Change Council said, hey, actually, we would like to get data publicly available that the city has to residents so that they can make their housing decision, right? So that was the thing that this body and the Community Change Council during this short 90 days of action was working toward, was to say, hey, we need to make the data publicly available. And that was a systemic outcome we were looking for. In that there are other things that came to be where, hey, we not only want to do that, but we want to make sure that it's digestible. So we want a website. We want all these different things to make sure that we don't only have the data publicly available, that's a systems win, but making it accessible for Schenectady residents. And so that is what you see across the timeline, that shift in action, that the establishment of that community-driven initiative, which for Schenectady in this 90 days was the establishment of HOST, which is Housing One Schenectady. That is the community-driven initiative that covers anything to do with the system around housing, the housing system, right? And so inside of that process, there were a lot of things that the council members did, from, doing outreach, meeting with people they would not normally meet with. The desire to make data publicly available was to say, hey, how can not only homeowners have information, but renters? Like, how can they get information around landlords? And so again, wanting to walk with people and do things with folks, the council engaged with the United Tenant Association. They also engaged with Schenectady Landlords for Influencing Change to say, hey, we're not here to be antagonistic, or we're not trying to shake the table, but we are trying to shake the table. But we also want to work with you. Like, how can we do this together? Can you support us in making this data publicly available from the city? And so ultimately, before the end of the 90 days, the Community Change Council was able to get the commitment from the mayor's office to make data publicly available to residents. That was the systems win. Y'all, that happened in 90 days. That happened in 90 days. I just want to say that again. That happened in 90 days, right? In addition to that, not only did we get that data, make that data publicly available for Schenectady residents, but also the Community Change Council, Neighborhood Assembly, hosts, like these folks, they went back to the community and say, hey, did we have all the correct data, right? Did we get the right data, right? or should we ask for additional data? So there was a resident survey, there was a community survey that went out and said, how would you use this information? What are the things that you take into consideration when making housing decisions, right? And so from that, not only were we able to identify the appropriate data that Schenectady residents said, hey, actually, this is the information I need to be able to make a decision around housing. We also were able to gauge interest of resident leaders in engaging in another resident-driven effort. So now we're continuing to build momentum as we go, right? And the folks that were engaged through the community survey were people that were in the stakeholder groups of the community leaders in their organizations, but also previously, from when Robert shared earlier, we had a lot of town halls, we had a lot of focus groups with different groups when developing this strategy. We went back to them and asked. So it was also like hey, we are really doing something, right? Like, how often are we creating strategies that sit on the shelf? We wanted to also provide an update to, hey, remember us? This is where we've been, and this is where we've been able to go. Right? And then from that resident engagement survey, we identified the appropriate data that was needed by residents to make housing-related decisions, but something that took place outside and beyond the 90 days was that the Community Change Council were invited by the City Council to present at a meeting. Like, they didn't have to call them, the council didn't have to call the City Council. The council didn't have to call, right? But the City Council actually said, hey, we would like you all to come in and share with us what you're doing, because we want. And obviously it was clear to them that this body was doing something important in the community. But ultimately, they were able to present to City Council, not only to share what they've been up to, but also the desires of where they would like to go, and also get their support and buy-in. David.
Thank you. I just wanted to pull out some points that I think are really important. First of all, just to take a step back, is that basically community sciences role, primarily Jasmine and Noah, we're providing that an early version of that power building hub through capacity building, through facilitation, and by creating connections. It's the idea of an intermediary that did that. So this was an initial step to get that going. So well, it wasn't all there in its full glory. It was happening. That component was there. I think the second part is that in that role, I think one of the things that came up a lot was keep on asking that question that Jasmine and such said, which was, how is the systems change? Because people have such a tendency to go to a program. And so I think that played a very critical role in this, is that repeated question, helping folks understand. We all talk about it, but what it is concretely. And the system change was that the city wasn't releasing that information. It was not acceptable that individual efforts by these groups to get something like that never got off the ground. And so this, with using the connections, using the group, and using how they organize, they were able to make the small change. No different than small wins typically in community organizing, but the beauty was the time frame made it happen quickly. And it's taking something other than a street sign and cleaning their streets, that this was a small win that could win, and yet that they could win by developing a short-term strategy with that time frame on it. So I just wanted to emphasize those points there.
Thanks, David. So now that we have the system win, and it's a very clear systems win, but there's still a need for funding, right? So we are in the process, we're still in this work. I want to invite Robert and David, I want you to invite you all to speak more to the funders' role inside of this.
Okay, so one of our next steps, and this is in progress, well, there's two. One is further developing the capacity building aspect of this, and we're actually doing some of that. We've supported as a first kind of a pilot, was very successful, a community advocates group who went through training, who formed relationships, and they're attached to another thing we launched, which is a food council. And so these people came from the community. They stepped forward. They loved this program. They made great personal relationships. And what they've done to date is they are doing what we call poverty and food speakouts, where we'll go to an elected official or we'll go have a community meeting where they'll tell their stories. And people will get a different sense of what that looks like, what food insecurity looks like from a very personal view. So we're doing some of that. It needs further development. The other thing that's important is creating this funders table. We've had a Zoom call with many funders from this region. A number are interested, and we're taking some steps to get that formed. And I think it's important, like it says, no single organization can achieve transformative change alone. Of course, that's true. And also, this is, as you can imagine, doing this kind of work, it's not without its risks. There's a potential for blowback, whether it might come from a donor or donor groups, it might come from some institutions. And to the extent that funders are united in putting forth and really leaning into equity as a core value, this is one way we can express it. It's tangible, and residents can actually see that this can work. And for us funders, we just have to let them lead and support them to do that work. So I'd say, we're kind of giving up control, if you would. But by giving up control, we're building power in the community. So I think all funders just have to be there first in understanding that and getting that straight. What is this about? Who are we giving power to? Does that feel threatening? Well, it might to some funders. So that's really why you have to really lean into this, take a back seat as a funder, and let the residents lead. And what our role is not just financially supporting them, but we can provide information, we can provide guidance to resident groups on their process, and really just help support the organization to happen. So I think it's going to be, this will be much stronger when we have the funders table in place. And we have shared, the idea is eventually some of us will co-fund some of this work together. So it's not just on any one of us, but we can pool resources from a variety of funders, hopefully both private and public. David, did you have something to add on that?
I would just add that what was really critical and where we've been so far is that there is an interest in this, and that it's and that while there's a lot of discussion about it, this is one of the few opportunities. There's the only opportunity that the funders table mentioned, that where funders could come together and talk about the subject. So I think that's just important when we think about the role and purpose coming up next. I think that covers.
Great, thanks, David. Okay, so why support community-driven action? This can be looked at both through a business lens, like how is this good business for us to be doing? And it can also be viewed just through a values lens. And I think for us, it's been a combination of the two, right? So one is, we have adopted equity as a core value of our foundation. But it's one thing to put it up on a list of values. It's another thing to actually express it It's another thing to actually move in that direction. So when I say lean into your values, that's what we're doing. We're not just putting nice, kind of words up there talking about our values. No, we're living them. And in terms of a business, like, don't all of us as funders, those of you who are on the call as funders, we really want to get to the root of the problem, right? It's one thing to sort of do patchwork grant making that, may give some temporary fixes or some incremental improvements. But if you really want to get to the root of an issue, you have to go to the community level. You need to hear what people are experiencing, how they experience those systems. And it's really only through that mechanism that you'll truly understand what's going on. And you get an entirely different picture than if you just went to some institutions and asked them what was going on. You get a slightly different viewpoint. So if we're truly going to get at the kind of outcomes I think we all want to have, and we really want to understand what the issue is, this piece of building power in the community is essential.
And just to add to that, especially around the systemic transformation point, I think that one of the things we can't emphasize enough is that building power is a matter of people getting what they want, collectively what they want, building community power. And by having that power, you then have the force to make larger scale changes. And we have this throughout our history. You look at big movements, okay, where the needle moved, where there was systemic change. It took power from the grassroots, from the people most effective, as well as allies and champions to support that. And so that's the importance. While funders tend to work on systemic change, and that's been a big part of the language for years, it's never had the force, never brought the force. And it's also been single issue. Okay, working on a project, so that organizing and power building has been around a single advocacy agenda or a smaller advocacy agenda, and never was able to maintain a small force, significant power and force to make those changes. We're talking about here, as we move on to the role of the funders table, we're realizing that this is, remember, this is we're having this as an ecosystem. This is the big picture. This is not about getting a single initiative going, but this is getting hundreds of initiatives going at multiple levels throughout Schenectady and other communities to be able to make substantial changes. And so how do you get those 1,000 flowers blooming? How do you get those moving and provide a support system for them so that it's not just one issue at a time, but there's a whole bunch of changes, and very powerful changes, because you now have a highly engaged and active and powerful citizenry. Just want to emphasize that piece as to why this is not a project, this is not a single issue. This is the start of making a lot of things happen in all directions. I'm going to talk now about the purpose and the role of the funders table, and it's to be a place for funders to come together. And if funder affinity groups are not a new idea, what is, I think, unique to this particular type of funding affinity and coming together is that it's, as we found with others around the country. I mean, there's several from Connecticut to California, Virginia. Local cities have funders table focused on power building, community organizing, and various forms of that. What we're finding is some additional supports. Not only is it a way to combine support, but it's a long-term ability to provide support, that you're providing a sustainable infrastructure, funding structure, because this stuff is not going to be solved in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Okay. The second part of it is that, in all frankness, is that we've seen with many individual funders taking this on, is that they become then the single target. It's, of the, when there's backlash, then an individual funder gets singled out. And especially for community foundations that are really dependent on their donor base, this can create a problem. So it's really not only sharing the responsibility and sharing the funding support, but it's also and learning together But it's also a matter of being able to say this is really a community and bunch of funders coming together, and you can't, it's the same idea we do in the work in the community. You can't separate us. We're together on this, and you can't single out one foundation for backlash because of the broader appeal. So that the purposes, as it mentions there, is not only to become a learning function by having presentation, helping to problem solve, to really discuss on how priorities to support each other, but also to be able to launch collective initiatives and to provide support, as Robert mentioned earlier, for that capacity building infrastructure that needs to be in place to keep that level of effort going. I don't know if you have more, Robert, you have more to reflect on in terms of where it is now. And I think a big part of this, and we can talk about discussion, is, you know, how the small win was a key piece to being able to go out and prove to other funders, right, that this is possible. I think Jasmine called it a proof of concept. It was really the first thing to be able to open not only internally the foundation, but to other funders to say, okay, everybody likes success, and they're now willing to join in and learn more. So I don't know if you have more to add, Robert.
Well, just that because this was a tangible, right? We were going to commit ourselves for 90 days and support that work and actually get something done versus it being more philosophical. You know, I'm aware that there have been other things happening within our region to kind of do some systems change work. But the feedback I've gotten from some of the participants is it seemed more about the concept, about the theory. It was less about actually doing something. And I think this is important to bring to other funders. So it's not just an idea. You know, we have some proof that this can work.
Thank you, David and Robert. And I'm just being transparent. I'm looking at time. We have about 7 minutes. I know that one of the questions was around lessons learned. So I want to make sure we can share just a few things that we learned inside of this process. And then we have another question around board buy-in and the 90-day approach. So just a little bit around lessons learned. One, this thing takes time. You all don't think that it's going to happen overnight. The prep that, you know, got us to this short-term action and being able to get the short win. There was time. There was engagement. There was opportunity for relationship building and trust building. So one thing is that it takes time and you cannot rush the process. The other thing I would like to share or highlight from our list here, and then I'll invite Robert or David to bring one of their favorites here around lessons learned, is this concept around giving up control and power, right? And trying to control the process. It is sharing power, right? Like you're sharing power with community to say, hey, I want to support you in the things that you need. And what does that look like? Ultimately, what do you get out of that as a funder? What do you get out of that as a community? And that's the thing is the bang for buck. At least you know you're doing something, right? That one community wants to happen is likely to be sustained because it is moved by community. And like, hey, this is something that we invested in, that community wanted to see, and that we did it with them and not to them. Again, to Robert's point, leaning into those values. And I think one more thing is having a communications plan was huge, because it's not if, but when you get backlash. It's not if, but when. It's not if, but when. Anytime power is challenged, there is resistance. Again, doesn't make the folks inside of these systems bad people. It is just a natural human response to change when you're challenging the status quo. Is there any other lessons learned that either one of you want to highlight before we?
I have.
Yes.
Okay, Robert, please.
Oh, yeah, I know we got to move along, but you know, this may seem obvious, but it takes a while to do this. A prerequisite to do this work is you have to build trust and relationships. And you have to be consistent over time. And so I'd say one of the things that we were doing right, I'd mentioned kind of going back 10 years, is we were consistently engaging the community and listening to them. So when we started to recruit people to be involved, they were open to listening because they knew we weren't going to back out. They knew that we were committed, and what we say we do, we do. So if you're not ready, if you don't have that developed, you're going to have to work on that before you get going.
Great, thank you. And my quick pieces are twofold. One is that knowing the difference, that's not on the list, but I want to emphasize it. Something that was a lot of talk is that knowing what community leaders are versus people who are outspoken versus just somebody you like that's in the neighborhood or looks the way that you hope somebody would look at the table. So really looking at community leaders are people with a constituency, they have an organization behind them, they lead a group and they represent at least a group and often more than any of us do, even if it's 5 people, 10 people, 20 people. That was a big idea of just picking at. That doesn't mean that they're an executive director of a nonprofit, that this person who leads an organization. It's a person who has a resident accountability to residents beyond themselves and their immediate family. That's a very important part to distinguish here, and that was a big thing versus the usual people who show up who are non-profits who are grantees, to learn that. And the last one I just can say very quickly, do not underestimate the importance of capacity building and plan it out in advance. Everyone assumes the capacity to do something you've never done before is there, but it isn't. And I've seen this mistake in all sorts of initiatives throughout my career. Has been this one issue that underestimating capacity, realizing that that was what was missed, and then having to try to recoup from that. That capacity building also has to do with facilitation, as I mentioned, connections, as well as being able to conflict transformation and facilitate those discussions and those disagreements. That's my piece.
Thanks, David. And Noah, if we can move on to the last slide, I just want to pose a question to Robert that we received. How did the quick win approach aid in getting buy-in from the board?
Well, as I think, as I said earlier, I mean, it was that the work was tangible, right? Something came of it, versus, they'd been hearing me talk about it for a while. The concept sounds beautiful, right? It sounds like something we ought to be doing, but is this actually going to work? And that was always the question. So in bringing it back to them, because now we have more work to do going forward into 2025 and 26, my hope is that they really will see that this works. And when I present an outlandish plan and budget to them next month, they'll be totally on board.
Thank you. Thank you. Out of respect for everyone's time, I just want to let everyone know that, yes, the resources will be available to you. There is a QR code on the screen that I'm also going to invite Robert to share more about. And if you have not done so already, please hear from my wonderful colleagues in our upcoming webinars on November 4th and November 14th. If you haven't registered, you don't want to miss that. Robert, did you want to share any information regarding the QR code folks are seeing on their screen?
Yeah, just quickly, a couple of things. One is, I know there were a lot of questions posed that came through. If you want to track me down, it's easy to find me, the Schenectady Foundation. Send me an email. I'm happy to respond to any other questions you have following this. Very happy to talk with you. The second is, okay, how are we going to support grassroots efforts? And so one of the things we established alongside of this process was we created a fund, Grassroots Fund for Equity. That's going to be completely designed to support small grassroots organizations who are out there doing good work. They don't have resources, they need support. And so we've raised in our first year, we've raised a little over $300,000 toward this, and we're going to continue to build it so it becomes a permanent fund. So that's our QR code. If we've touched your heart in any way, you can use that QR code to make a contribution to the Grassroots Fund, if you're so kind. But as I said, I'm happy to respond to any of the questions you have. Just give me an email.
Thank you to every one of you who joined us today. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to follow up. And I also want to thank our esteemed panelists, David Chavez and Robert Carrera. Thank you so much for bringing all your gifts to today's conversation. And to all of you, until next time, bye-bye.
Okay, thank you, Jasmine. And Noah. Bye.
And Noah.